Welcome to Bleach Revisited. I am Carker Gold, your host of this series in which we will read every single chapter of the Bleach manga, and then continue to provide critical analysis of both the art and the narrative, personal response to the chapters one by one, and then discussion of how those chapters connect to the rest of the manga. So, if any of that interests you, you are in the right place, and we will begin the video with our typical start, which is to read the next chapter. So this is chapter 45, Point of Purpose. Our abilities were awakened by contact with Ichigo? Yes. Whoa, wait a second, I don't understand. You don't have to understand. Your transformation is not a disease. You were just given the key to the door in front of you. There's no need to know the cause, no need for sorrow or sadness. What comes next is up to you. You can use your keys to open the door, or lock it tight. And if you do choose to open it, you can still decide not to pass through. Sir, the Kuman, the sky ridges, they've begun to converge. Okay, is everything ready? Yes, sir. Alright, let's go. Wait a second. We still haven't... Do you want to come along? Huh? Do you want proof? Come see for yourself. The world you're about to step into. And the enemy you have to fight. Bleach, Chapter 45, Point of Purpose. You, Kurosaki. I finally found you. If I could, I'd make you cry right now, but I have to pulverize this guy first. Cone, where have you been? What are you getting mad at me for? Save me for whenever you finished him. Shut up. Okay, I had to run all over town because you didn't bring Rukia's thingamajig. So, you should be happy. Running is a great way to relieve stress. What? I don't have stress. Liar. Then what's with the perma frown? Didn't you dedicate your soul to Rukia? One mind, one body? Then you should have been able to find her right away. I did. I could find her just by smell. Why you? I do not smell. That's enough. I'm your enemy. This is no time for bickering. I never said you smelled bad. It's a heavenly sweet smell. See, like this. Fool, stop. Hey, stop or I'll... Ah! My nose! She broke my nose! Hey, Rukia, that's my body. Think before you punch. I'm bleeding. Don't yell at her, Ichigo. It was my fault. If you want to hit somebody, hit me. Oh! Sheesh, I didn't mean to. If you hadn't... That's enough, Ichigo Kurosaki. I am your opponent. Wow. He's fast. Yeah, you're right. This fight is between you and me. So stop talking about who can kill the most hollows. Let's face each other right now. Ain't that right, Uryu? Say something. Hey, Ichigo, look. What the heck is that? The cracks in the sky, they're gathering at one point. What? Wait, that's not all. Take a closer look. The hollows are gathering at that point. Wait, what are you? Look at how many of them there are. Think before you attack. What? Are you scared, Kurosaki? Huh? I'm not... If you're scared, watch from here. I won the contest. Over here, Hollows. The last Quincy, Uryu Ashita, will destroy you. Last Quincy? What's he talking about? 200 years ago, the Quincy's were wiped out. What? All surviving Quincy's despise Soul Reapers. The origin of that hatred lies in their annihilation. 200 years ago, the Quincy's perished at the hands of the Soul Reapers. That's right. But it was a difficult choice, even for the Soul Reapers. Soul Reapers had to eliminate the Quincy's to prevent the collapse of the universe. Wow, his part was so small. And that is it for Chapter 45 of Bleach, Point of No Return. Let's get right into some discussion of this chapter, right? I'll go through analysis first. Typically, I go analysis first and then response second. Sometimes I mix that up, but let's talk about the art as well as the narrative and kind of what's going on here and what's operative. So we're coming off that conversation with Kisuke, right, where both Chad and Orihime are learning that their powers really, they always had them dormant inside of them, but because of this connection with Ichigo, because of these interactions, they awakened to these powers, right? They had this contact with Ichigo. As I said before, I feel it's a little bit more like significant of that, and maybe Urahara is not telling them everything. Yeah, it's due to this connection with Ichigo because Ichigo is the connective kind of thread between these things, right? Ichigo fighting these hollows, but it's because they have these life or death encounters, and they continue to with hollows. So it's more like your abilities were awakened because you both had a connection to Ichigo that in turn had you fighting hollows that came after you because of your high spiritual pressure. But it's not like Ichigo himself either had any agency or was really there's anything special about Ichigo that caused that to happen. So yeah, it's like I said, it's a thing that as far as I read it, I don't see it as like, oh well, it's specifically Ichigo that's important there. Just that like I had mentioned just earlier, Ichigo is kind of the connective thread between these two. Uh, as much as like Hollows and Rukia is really, honestly. But again, making about Ichigo really does help us serve to kind of bring everything back to our protagonist, which is the whole kind of movement of this chapter and the previous one is after all these kind of asides where we could have Chad had a fight or he may have a fight, and Ruki is talking about the Quincy. So we've kind of gone to a lot of different places, and so the point of this is to kind of bring our focus back to Ichigo, right? To tie all these threads together with Ichigo being the kind of knot that binds them, so to speak. So that's the idea here, and why I believe the focus is put on Ichigo, even though, like I said, their powers are more like their own personal abilities that were developed between these life or death situations with Hollows, and it's not like Ichigo specifically is significant there. Um, but I like that he says, he provides this whole thing, right? This isn't a disease, and this is really an interesting point of view from Urahara because he's saying like, look, this isn't like some sort of terrible thing that you're developing these powers, right? Because in a lot of ways, right, they're both developing very unique supernatural powers that could really otherize them from other humans. And as we come to find out in this chapter, which was pretty heavily implied before, in fact, I just outright said it because of how heavily implied it was. But Soul Reapers killed the Quincy, right? So we have the sense that like Soul Reapers themselves really don't get along with other people that can do battle with Hollows. So this idea of like being significantly different and kind of other, and treating that like a disease, right? That you've essentially you've gained this thing that's gonna maybe be a problem for you because it's attracting these Hollows, right? It's not healthy, even though it is a power. Um, so it's a unique take. It's certainly acceptive. I think Urahara here proves that he's as much of a schemer and kind of shady guy that he is. This sort of dialogue is proving that he's very accepting of other people. Um, if anything, like Urahara, and I think his shop represents like the quintessential kind of ragtag team, right? He's got these different people of different ages and ethnicities and maybe even backgrounds all working together for some shared purpose, right? A common cause. So I think the idea that he's accepting of both Chad and or Hime, and then he wants to let them know that it's not a disease, is the sort of thing that just exactly speaks from his mentality. He's a much more accepting person. Um, so long as you're not hurting anybody. Obviously, he's willing to stop the hollows, and he was even willing to eliminate Cone. So there's definitely some, I guess, nuance to that. But it seems like more than anything, with whenever it comes to people, at the very least, he's accepting. I don't know if he considered Khan to be people at the very beginning or not, or if he was just doing things to try to keep everything under the, you know, I guess, from the recognition of Soul Society, because you can't just have Khan running around, right? Not only is he illegal merchandise, but it's ordered to be executed. So it's interesting kind of how he toes the line of what Soul Society demands, but he also kind of skirts that in a lot of ways and is kind of outside of that law. As we know, he's essentially a smuggler, right? So neat moment from him as he continues to explain this, and he really presents their power as this way of stepping into this other world, like through a door. That they have essentially, it's just the key to kind of go into this new world, right? And then they could decide whether or not they want to pass through. But once they pass through, they're completely on the other side. There's no coming back, right? But you're able to at least open it and see what's on the other side, and this is both figurative and literal, right? The idea is that there's this larger world, this spiritual world beyond them, of hollows and of this larger kind of fight between Soul Society and maybe even Quincy are tied in there. There's a lot going on, and Urahara is kind of inviting them to make their own decision about it. Obviously, by reiterating the connection that they have with Ichigo, it's kind of pushing them towards accepting that fight because, of course, they both care about Ichigo, and they, to an extent, they're already slanted towards this anyway. And of course, Ichigo is acting as a Soul Reaper right now, right? Here we get Tessai showing up to mention that the Kumon, or the Sky Ridges, they're converging. I think here we get, speaking of the art, it's kind of interesting. Of course, he starts talking about keys and opening the door, and we get a doorway to be literally illustrative of that, even if it isn't one that's locked. You get a lot of shots of Urahara's feet. I don't know what's going on with that. Anyway, it's kind of an interesting bit here, but we do get a cool sweep of his coat as he turns to leave. Generally, just a lot of Urahara looking cool, kind of in charge, right? But yeah, we also, the audience, are invited into this other world. So in a lot of ways, it aligns us with Orihime and Chad. As Urahara is the person that has this information, he's inviting us into this world, this group of humans, as they're becoming more aware. Here we get, of course, Jinta and Ururu, both with their weapons that they didn't get to use before whenever they went after against Cone. I guess technically Tessai has something over here too. Remember he had like a bunch of swords last time. And he says, the enemy you have to fight. And obviously that's going to be all the hollows that they are looking up and seeing. I love, this is a great chapter cover, just like the way that the lettering here is done. And the I guess it's sweat drops in the water, but pretty cool. It's been a while since we've gotten a Rukia cover, so I will always accept that. Here we have the hollow from the previous chapter that had been defeated, if you do remember. But I love this face-off. This is great, and especially the expression Ichigo has versus Uryu's, right? Ichigo's very excited to be like back in the fight. And to be facing down with his opponent, which I love Ichigo's attitude. I think that's one of the things that really makes him shine as a protagonist, is that he has such a kick-ass sort of excited way of going about things. At least on the onset of all of this, right? There's certainly moments of despair and plight and worry and concern, and we got a little bit of all that darkness whenever it came to the everything but the rain, or not everything, memories in the rain, right? Whenever Ichigo is really worried about his mother's death and the Grand Fisher and all of that. But I think this for me is the kind of the Ichigo that I like to see is whenever he's in command and he's cool and he's really excited and he's feeling it. It's a very cool way to present your protagonist, and I think it's one of the things that makes him a bit likable as a protagonist, and maybe a little bit different. That he's a kind of fun character, not too self serious, which I appreciate. Anyway, and speaking about not being too self serious, this entire moment is great for that because Ishida is. I think the point of this is that Ishida is juxtaposed to Ichigo by Ishida being very self-serious, very, this is my serious moment. I'm going to prove myself as the final Quincy and, show these soul reapers. And, meanwhile, Ichigo is punching his own body in the face, trying to beat up Kon. They're having this big argument. I think it's a great moment to really highlight the difference between Ichigo and Uryu, at least in how serious they are. I mean, it's a very serious moment, but Ichigo isn't above kind of engaging in this other stuff. But yeah, I love this pulverize this guy, and he grabs essentially his own self by the collar. I love, of course, the way that Ishida's just drawn in the background here as they both argue with one another. We get, of course, that kind of comedic framing that Kubo's been using, where we have our character reacting on the left to this absurd situation. Yeah. I love that, of course, Rukia comes in whenever it comes up to smell. She really insists upon that. And then what really sells this for me is especially Ishida kind of coming back with this moment of serious in this panel and then getting completely overwhelmed by these other three. I wish these panels had a little bit more going on rather than being so text oriented. They're very obviously dialogue focused, as everything kind of is scuffling off to the side here. And instead, we just kind of get the focus of Uryu looking kind of guys, come on. But I do like that he eventually, snaps them out of it. And we get a lot of really great shots of Uryu, drawing his bow in this chapter. I think this is a fantastic chapter for just really cool Ishida panels. Lots of just great momentum here with this pull. And then especially, God, these panels as he pulls the ring back and then he's got the blood on his finger and it slicks out as he shoots the arrow. It's absolutely visceral, and I love it. It does a great job. I think especially using this kind of grainy, background against the energy light here really draws the eye to this, here with the chain and the kind of circle of his cross that he used. And of course he shoots at Ichigo, but then he's already surprised because he knows Ichigo's about to react, right? And I love this shot of Ichigo, especially, it looks like he's completely disdainful. He's like, miss me with that shit, It's a fantastic expression, and I think really, this is something that I've kind of praised Kubo for in earlier chapters, but in this one especially, we can see some really great expression work that sells these characters absolutely in these moments. And I think Ichigo's expression here is fantastic. Especially as he comes and he just shatters this shot instantly, and we get this reminder that Ichigo being fast, and I think that's one of the cool things that's easy to forget about Ichigo is that one of his strengths is his speed, the quickness of his actions, and it's not just how quick he acts, but how quick he's able to think and react to things too. He's very quick on his feet and quick-minded. He has that sort of celerity to him, and so it's easy to forget because you see him. He's got this big sword. You think he's kind of this brawler type, but no, he's a very quick, kind of nimble character, which is cool. It sets him apart from Chad and Orihime, I think, in an interesting way, where Chad is like the big, kind of invulnerable, punchy type, and Orihime is, she's going to be more ranged and have these different like options for her powers and all of that. Um, and Uryu certainly has. I think to differentiate Uryu from Orihime, Uryu has got like these arrows and all these. So far he's got the hollow bait, so he has these items that he uses, and they obey different rules and kind of act differently. You could rapid fire the arrows, whereas shooting Tsubaki is like a one and done kind of thing, as far as we understand. You get one mode of attack with the Shunshin but meanwhile, Ichigo is very, he's not just this physical attacker, but he's also very quick, which it's surprising. And here he proves that, of course, he's quicker than even Uryu, who's, as far as we understand, pretty fast. I mean, this is Uryu who's been shooting hollows all day and maybe isn't on peak form, but it is cool. And this reminds Ichigo that the fight's between them. And I like that Ichigo insist on the pragmatic thing. Like, this is a fight between us. Why do we bring everybody else into this? Why do we bring the hollows into this, right? And it's interesting because whenever you get to the heart of the matter, it's like the way Uryu sees it is that Quincy were fighting hollows and that they should be, the Shinigami aren't needed because Quincy were dealing with hollows just fine, right? They're better at fighting hollows, and that's the real measure of their skill. But for Ichigo doesn't. He's like, he sees it personally, right? He's like, okay, if you want to prove who's better, instead of this challenge that is nonsense and is unrealistic. I mean, like, when is the town going to get attacked by over 100 hollows in one night, right? The realistic thing is like, you want to prove you're stronger. Let's just fight one on one, and that makes a lot of sense. Also, of course, from the kind of manga that we're reading. This is a shonen battle manga. It's all about these one-on-one fights. So for Ichigo, he's speaking towards like what you would expect from the genre, but also it speaks a lot towards his own mentality of like, let's not get all these other people involved. If it's beef that you have with me, settle it with me. So yet again, it's another moment of one, obviously, because it aligns with what we expect from the genre and because it aligns with what we want, right? We want to see these characters face against each other, like in an actual fight. It's easy to root for Ichigo because it aligns with our genre expectations of what we typically want as a reader if we're coming to this sort of manga. But then also, it shows a lot of difference between the way that Ichigo and Uryu conceptualize this, what would make one stronger than the other, right? And what it means to face somebody else. And like as of course, whenever Ichigo faces him straightforward, Uryu has this moment of hesitation, right? This pause, and Ichigo's like, "Look, say something." And I wonder, here we can read this as Uryu is recognizing all the hollows like showing up in the sky, but it's really Kon that points that out and is like looking elsewhere. I think this moment is the way that I interpret it is because the Shinigami wiped out the Quincy. This is Ishida realizing exactly the way that this conflict got conflated in the past, right? Where the Quincy were eliminating the Hollows, and so were the Shinigami, and then maybe they got into some sort of feud over, who's doing it one way or the other, and then the Shinigami ultimately challenged the Quincy, right, and fought them head on. And that's maybe Uryu realizing like the past is playing itself out. That here yet again a Shinigami is challenging a Quincy to a battle, and he's reminded of exactly what had happened, and so maybe it's shaking him that like to an extent, as much as I say it was kind of malicious for him to involve all these innocents and kind of even hope that some of them got hurt or injured so that Ichigo would despair. I think there was a bit of innocence to Ishida, or you just thinking like, hey, we'll do this challenge, and not like, hey, let me kill you to prove that I'm better, right? So it's kind of a shift in the kind of the paradigm that was there, what was set in stone before of like, oh well, the Shinigami beat the Quincy, literally eliminated them, right? It was like a genocide, which is terrible to think about, but then here it is kind of being evoked yet again towards Ishida as a Soul Reaper is challenging him specifically to a battle. Yeah, of course, this is what we had, what, this is a callback to what we had seen before. Obviously, the cracks in the sky were this huge thing that has been kind of ominously there from the beginning of this arc, looming over everything since Bent, I believe, was the chapter. I think that was 41 or 2, something like that. But here we are; they're finally all converging into one point. So that's not good, right? And as Kisuke put, this is the sort of enemy that they're facing, right? This is this apotheosis of the hollow threat. Like this is the threat here, really, and we're about to see that. And so, Uryu snaps around and insists, right, like that we get these reactions from everybody. And I love the difference in reaction between, here we have Kone's focus is of course up in the sky, but Ichigo is really focused on Uryu, which is great. And then especially the difference in how Ichigo's reacting versus how Kone's reacting in his body is kind of interesting. Again, it's use of those expressions to really sell these different characters, even if their features are identical. One thing that a lot of people will say, one criticism I think the Bleach tends to get is that there's a lot of characters that look the same. I mean, obviously Ichigo and Kon being literally the same body, oh yeah, you can just use the same design. But I think what that neglects is how powerfully these expressions get used. And, this even got mentioned by Kon himself. Like, Ichigo needs to de-stress a little bit because his brow is always furrowed, right? And you can tell that right here, the difference between Kon, who has, like, a much more eased expression, but he's panicking, and Ichigo, who's got this tenser expression, right? You can see how his brow's all knotted up. And, he's got this frown at this almost scowl as he reacts. But yeah, I don't know. I never sure there's certain things like you can maybe compare the like curvature of their jaws to each other. Like right here we can see Ishida and Ichigo have a similar kind of jaw line, the way that they're drawn. But they're otherwise the way that like their lips, their mouth, their eyes, their hair, everything like that. I think Kubo's character designs are fantastic, and the criticism that they received in the past about them being too samey is kind of negligent. It highlights somebody that didn't read the manga or didn't really pay that much attention. Because, like I said, you could tell by these expressions pretty significantly what character is what. Like you could probably put just this panel in front of somebody, and they'd be able to recognize that it's Kon rather than Ichigo. If they were, really into the manga, right? Because there's so much about this that reads as Kon rather than as Ichigo, just based off of what we know from Ichigo's expressions. Anyway, and then that is not to say, we have characters like Rukia who looks wholly unique. Like no one else looks like Rukia, just in the face even. There's a pretty good selection. I might see if I can't link images to an imager file or something in the description, but it's just characters' eyes from Bleach and no other features, and you can easily tell each of the characters just based off of their eyes alone. It's really good stuff. And speaking of really good stuff, I love this 2-page spread of all the hollows kind of converging on that point. I wish I had a better way to kind of show this, but this would be the page that's on the left. This is the page that's on the right. And we get a lot of fantastic, really kind of bespoke hollow designs as we see all these different hollows all gathering. Yeah, it's just it's a huge moment because it's more hollows than we've seen in the entirety of the manga so far, all on one spread. I love this guy's design. This is fantastic. But yeah, kind of neat. Of course, Ishida immediately goes in there, and I love this. I don't know if we've gotten a shot from this kind of angle with Ishida, with his back and his shoulders facing us, but I love this shot immediately. It does a really good job of playing off from the last panel as he's aiming his bow up, towards the sky, but also with his back to us, because we're coming off of those pages, so we're reading this upwards towards kind of where that action might be, previously in the page even. I don't know. It reads very well as far as referential to the previous spread that we saw. I like that Ichigo has this moment of like, hey, look, there's so many. Think before you attack. Like, what are you going to call them all down upon us? Like, I think that this is kind of neat to think about Ichigo from like this kind of tactician standpoint. And then of course, Uryu calls him out as being scared because he has quite a few things to prove, right? Um, and yeah, again, really great uses of their expressions. Really great moment for seeing Uryu kind of insist upon himself and try to call the hollows to him. But here's where we finally get to kind of the last thing that this chapter leaves us on, which I think is it's something that we had coming. Like I said, I kind of outright stated that I was pretty sure this was the case, and it's because I knew it's the case, right? That Ichigo, I like that, again, we have this kind of irony, right, where Ichigo doesn't know this, and Rukia didn't know it until she talked to Kisuke, but here we have Rukia kind of relating it to Ichigo, but she learned a little bit more that we didn't know off screen. So it's neat that we know information Ichigo doesn't, but Rukia knows information we don't, and that gets revealed here too. And it all comes from Kisuke, so you have to think, well, how much does Kisuke know that none of these characters, including ourselves, know, right? But it's a neat way of all of this coming together, in that Ichigo starts to ask what's going on with it, like what's he talking about? These Quincy's were wiped out, and they despise Soul Reapers because the Soul Reapers were the ones that eliminated all the Quincy, right? Urahara was vague about it earlier. I mean, it was pretty clear, but he was vague enough that you could read it one way or another. Because he was like, well, the result of their actions was that they were eliminated. So maybe you could think like, oh, maybe there was some big conflict with the Hollows or something like that. Their revenge, led them like to attack Hollows so relentlessly that it got them all killed. But no, it was actually the Soul Reapers that wiped them all out 200 years ago. And the way that this is written, like the idea of them all being wiped out, like that's why I tend to phrase it as like a genocide. Like there's maybe a war or something, right? At the very least, there was a concentrated effort by the Soul Reapers to eliminate the Quincy. And it's interesting because she puts this in exactly that. Like it was a difficult choice for the Soul Reapers. So it was they made this decision, this choice. And I love Ichigo's kind of shocked expression here, as we see a very determined Uryu. And then, kind of interestingly, is that this changes to this moment of Urahara explaining things. And I wonder, I can't read this as flashback because we're not getting like the typical flashback indicators of the outside borders changing. So I have to read this as Urahara explaining this to Chad and Orihime, or at the very least, this coming back to a moment of when Urahara was explaining this to Rukia, because clearly he explained this to Rukia. And so we have to assume that this is something that Rukia is saying at the same time to Ichigo, but Urahara is explaining at the same time. Like it's a simultaneous, like, mirrored thing, both between Urahara and Rukia, and Ichigo and Rukia, but then also maybe also Rukia, Urahara and Orihime and Chad. They're not pictured here, so it's hard to say if that's the case. But because this isn't indicated as being in the past, like a flashback of Urahara telling this to Rukia, I believe that this is current with him explaining that to Chad and Inoue. At least that's what it feels like. But the idea, at the very least, is that Urahara expressed that the Soul Reapers had to eliminate the Quincy's to prevent the universe from ending, the collapse of the universe, which is pretty significant. So somehow, some way, Quincy's threatened the universe itself, and that's why they had to be eliminated. Because, as you know, like, Soul Reapers are like these arbiters of humanity, right? They help humans move along to the afterlife, and they defeat these hollows because these hollows prey on human spirits. And so the end of the universe not just means the end of all Soul Reapers, but it also probably means the end of human life as we know it. So probably pretty important. It's like, yeah, killing an entire people is messed up, but it seems like just asking them to stop wasn't working. Maybe. Regardless, it kind of it shifts the thing because as we expected before, whenever we were thinking about it before, it's like, well, sure, the Quincy's are just fighting hollows and everything. Um, like, yeah, they're eliminating them. The souls aren't getting to pass on, which seems pretty problematic. But like, you know, at the very least, it doesn't seem like that's threatening the universe. But here we learn that there's something about that is right. That's something about Quincy, and if not something about like that, then the Quincy might have had some sort of plot. Whatever it was, they couldn't allow the Quincy to continue to live because they threatened the universe in this way. So it's kind of interesting that is invited to us that there was this human threat to the universe, because beforehand, our biggest threat presented was the threat of hollows, but now we're presented with the threat of humans, and I mean to a lesser extent there is the threat of Soul Society and the kind of acting, obviously Rukia is acting outside the boundaries of the law, and so is Kisuke, and like there's this idea of punishment and execution kind of floating around, but that's been backgrounded compared to the Hollow threat especially. So it's neat here that we get another kind of threat that's presented to us, that the universe itself could end because of the actions of some humans, of the Quincy. And so that again deepens the world and kind of presents more of this other world, these huger sort of existential threats that our characters might have to face. I love that Orihime is kind of like talking about how small a part Tessai was playing. He just showed up to say like, "Oh, hey, the Kumon." Welcome to Tessai's character. I mean, he's very tertiary character, but you gotta love him. I mean, look at him. Look at his mustache. Big dude with glasses. I'm a fan. Anyway, that's about it for this chapter. I think, again, using like all black rather than all white to really highlight this moment of like having a very serious sort of reaction, a very dire one. I like, again, Kubo will use those all white backgrounds to have a very shocking moment, or an all black background where it's a very like serious kind of dreadful moment even. So, here we have all white to kind of highlight, this moment of I won the contest, right? Kind of neat. Like anytime that attention's really being drawn to a character, we'll get one of those for whatever reason. But I think, again, it's focusing on it specifically these character moments and drawing a lot, like I said, a lot of that attention to just the character and how they're reacting or how they're presented. All in all, very exciting chapter. Lots of really cool moments in the art. Like, ooh, I love that spread of the hollows. Like, that's almost the sort of thing that you could set as a background for a computer, like like a desktop wallpaper or something. But just all of the hollows converging is fantastic. That's art, baby. But it's neat. I do want to say, whenever she's talking about her abilities being awakened, I like that we see Orihime in profile with her hairband, kind of like center of the panel almost. Really kind of reminds us especially of those abilities that we had been seeing. So it's a neat use of that as well, because we could have gotten her from, the front on or whatever. Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's a chapter. I think more. I like the other chapters. I think these chapters are all really strong for me. I really like seeing all these characters get these really badass moments and really get to shine and develop their powers. I think this is like really peak early Bleach. Really seeing this medley of cool characters doing cool things, fighting hollows. Supernatural threats in an urban environment. I mean, that's essentially peak early Bleach, right? Whenever you think about early Bleach, that's exactly it. It's these human characters developing interesting powers to fight monsters in an urban environment. And this is that to a T. It's developing all these different threats. It's tying all these elements together. I think this chapter really neatly pulls it all together and sets up for both the Quincy as this kind of threat to the universe, but also this growing hollow threat that is amassing literally in the skies. And so it gives us a lot of things to be excited for all of our characters to rally against going forward. But also it provides a little bit more depth to the universe. So yeah, A plus. One of my favorite chapters is this one, and I didn't expect it to be. You think about certain ones like Rocket Future 7 is one that quickly comes to mind whenever I think about like standout chapters, really exciting ones. But here, 45 Point of Purpose is really really cool. I am a fan. Lots of great moments for a lot of different characters. I think both Ishida and Ichigo both get really cool moments. Ishida like shattering the arrow as it's fired at him, and Ishida just in general getting a lot of cool shots. But I mean, we still get to see like our whole cast here, really, out of all the characters that have appeared on volume covers. So that's cool too. As we see again more and more of our cast congealing and coming together. Yeah, fun times. But let's get into connections to the rest of the manga, right? Let's talk about spoilers. So for those of you who aren't interested in these spoilers, feel free to step out of the video here. As always, if there's anything in my analysis that you want to talk about, feel free to leave a comment. If you notice something I didn't, or you want to talk about some aspect of the artwork or the chapter in general, the narrative, feel free to comment that as well. I'm interested in what your takes are on all of this, or if there was any specific panel or moment that you feel like I glossed over or didn't talk about. But let's talk about spoilers. The same thing goes here for, of course, the spoiler section, because there's a bit going on in this chapter, obviously. Yeah, again, I think I'm working off of that theory that I had that I feel like Urahara is really just trying, like, as much as he says, oh, you don't have to pass the threshold, I'm just giving you the keys, I'm totally accepting of you, haha, you're all connected to Ichigo. Like, I almost I would be willing to bet that like Urahara is really just trying to like as much as he's trying to present it as their own decision, it really isn't. He's just trying to make them feel like they have agency in doing all of this and being involved in this larger conflict, and wants to kind of make them feel like they're choosing to join Ichigo's side, which is really Urahara's side in this conflict. And this chapter is fucking amazing for foreshadowing. We'll get there. I like this here transformation is not a disease line. I talked about that really reflecting a lot of Urahara's mentality. As we know, both of them have powers that seem really born of Hollow Ryetsu. They both have essentially full rings, right? And so it's interesting to see, this transformation not being disease, really maybe being reflective of the way that Urahara feels about the Visored, right? Because he didn't see their transformation as something being wrong. He was accepting of them. And in fact, saved their lives, right? He still saw them as people. So that's kind of neat. It's cool that we get a little bit of that from Urahara before any of that we see that kind of understanding from his perspective. Um, yeah, Tessai really does play a bit role. Of course, I'd be loath not to say how much Kisuke's coat looks like an inverted colors of a captain's coat. Instead of being white with the kind of black slivers on the bottom, I mean, I know it's green, but, black and white, it's just straight up black. Or like a dark green, I think, in, the volume cover as well as these chapters. But obviously it's dark on white rather than white on dark, which is kind of speaks towards his exile status, perhaps, but also speaks towards his previous status as a captain. Of course, characters that wear cloaks are the strong ones. And you see that's why Teskai gets a front cloak, because he's the Mig Magic Man. Yeah. Anyway, it's interesting here because he says the enemy you have to fight, and we're left on that. And our assumption is supposed to be that it's these hollows, right? That he's like, oh, the enemy that you have to fight is going to be these hollows. But kind of curious is that if we take those last lines in the manga, right, of this chapter where he's talking about the Quincy and the collapse of the universe, why would he be telling them that? If we're to take that as not a flashback of Urahara explaining this genuinely to Chad and Noe, then, maybe the idea was like, okay, he's explaining the context of this, but I think it makes sense for Urahara to be expressing that as like, hey, you might actually have to fight the Quincy or stop the collapse of the universe at some point. Because, I mean, at the very least, he knows that Eisen has this plan to essentially stand at the top of everything, right? And rule the universe. Um, I don't know if Urahara expected, I might have to go back and read Thousand Year Blood War to see if Urahara had, in mind that the Quincy were going to return. But if we read this as the enemy you have to fight being the Quincy, that's an insane kind of revelation, right? The idea that the enemy that they have to fight is presented as both Hollows but also Quincy is kind of significant. Um, but I think that maybe that might be pulling a little bit too far too, maybe overreading it. Um, let's see other things that can kind of connect here. Of course, we know that Ichigo is a Quincy, right? That he has, he is the child of Misaki, and so therefore he technically is a Quincy as well. Kind of interestingly, yeah, they're talking about all this smell stuff and noticing each other. Yeah, kind of neat. I like that he's able to shatter Ishida's arrow. I don't know if we ever get another Quincy attack shattered with a weapon like that ever. So that's kind of cool. Maybe speaks towards Ichigo's proclivities as a Quincy. I'm not sure. Ichigo having this very one-on-one mentality is, of course, something that we would see played out throughout the manga. So that's just more consistent character building. The Hollows converging towards the Minos Grande is, obviously that's the idea. That's how you build these greater kind of hollow threats, right? Is that all these hollows sort of devour each other, and the one that is the strongest, that kind of arises out of that, is that higher class, right? Um, Interesting that we get this kind of fearlessness and Ishida rushing forward to attack, uh, and kind of taking it as a point of pride to do so. Um, of course, we would see that again in Soul Society, right, where Ishida kind of rushes forward and puts everything in attacking, gets eliminated pretty quickly. Not as quickly as Chad, unfortunately, but pretty quickly with the battle with Mayuri. So, following that, he gets captured, and then he has no powers for a while. So it's kind of neat to think about. And then whenever we look forward, I mean, we can't really say that's the case for the Arrancar arc. I mean, he fights Sazale, but they kind of get overwhelmed, both him and Renji. And then we really don't see another deal with Ishida. Like, I mean, he's there for a little bit of the, Fullbringer arc. He doesn't really do anything in Karakara Invasion, as far as I remember. And or I say Karakara Invasion, what I mean is Fate Karakara. I guess they're different things, right? Invasion would be whenever Grimmjow attacks, versus, Fake is whenever they literally make the fake town. Anyway, and then in the final, clearly we know what happens. 1,000 Year Blood War, but it's interesting that this at least is consistent maybe with, their strategies in Soul Society, even, right? Where Ishida doesn't care if he draws out this very powerful opponent. He's very proud and willing to kind of put his life on the line to face these opponents. And I think that's also consistent with him too. Yeah, it's neat thinking about all this, Quincy stuff whenever, because obviously on first read we're meant to read it as, Ishida and Ichigo, Ishida being the Quincy, Ichigo being the Soul Reaper, but reading it again as Ichigo as a Quincy, kind of interesting, like the way that he reacts to a lot of this, how he gains more empathy for Ishida, maybe without even realizing that they have that commonality between them. But this is what I'm saying is like here, the idea of Soul Reapers having to eliminate Quincy's to prevent the collapse of the universe. I mean, that is literally the Thousand-Year Blood War plot, and so it's interesting that that gets brought up here in chapter 45 of Bleach. And I do think to an extent Kubo must have gone back and reread those early chapters to sort of think of ideas that he wanted to present in the later arcs. I mean, this is something that mangaka do all the time, to make their work feel a little bit more consistent. I don't know if he always, there's arguments over whether or not he always planned to have Quincy as this final antagonist. I would argue probably, right? While it certainly seems like a lot of stuff is lifted from early arcs, I think at the very least those broader strokes feel like something that was always planned out. I say that because, a lot of people I know get bummed out with the way that the Aizen whole thing turned out. They really felt like Aizen was the antagonist of Bleach, and after Aizen was defeated, which it's kind of a upsetting defeat because Ichigo doesn't even with the Mugetsu, Ichigo doesn't actually defeat him, and he has to get sealed away, and isn't completely killed, and etc. And then you jump into this arc where Ichigo's got like low powers, he's trying to get his powers back, and it's like, what's that about? I'll defend all of that, but that's because whenever I was reading Bleach, I got the sense that it was about these kind of larger thematic things going on, and that defeating Aizen was only kind of a footnote in this larger individual versus society, how Ichigo is ultimately going to decide to kind of play his role in that, and that there was more going on, and especially with Aizen, that he was hinting at this larger sort of structural imbalance, and that had to be addressed somehow, and it gets addressed with the Quincy invasion. And so, I don't know, I always felt like that was there, that like maybe it doesn't feel great to think like all of Aizen was essentially a setup for the Thousand-Year Blood War, but I don't know. It feels more natural than like Aizen really being set up as the final antagonist. Like I think Yuha Bach works way better as the final antagonist than Aizen does, for a number of reasons. But yeah, it's neat that we do get that here at chapter 45, that we have this sort of portent of what would come to be the final conflict in Bleach, between Shinigami and the Quincy over the collapse of the universe. So that's kind of neat. And whenever they talk about collapse of the universe, what I mean is, as you might know, and I know if you've only read the manga, or especially if you've only watched the anime, you might not know this, but the idea, and I'm pretty sure in the books they eventually elaborate upon this, which makes me real bummed out because this was my headcanon theory, and then seeing other people be like, oh, it's my headcanon too, and then it essentially being soft confirmed by Kubo. Yeah, it's exciting that my ideas got soft confirmed, but I don't get to be, my super special secret club, right? Where only I'm right about a thing and I can feel good about that. But no, it's pretty much accepted canon now. But the idea is that, whenever the Soul King was created, more or less, that the reality was split into these distinct different kind of sections, right? So you have the world of the living, and then you have the Soul Society, and then you have Hueco Mundo in between. And before that happened, they were all just one universe. And so the collapse of the universe isn't that the universe is going to end, it's that these different realities are going to collapse upon each other. And instead of having this hierarchy of realities where souls get sent to the afterlife, they reincarnate into bodies in the real world, there will just be one realm. And there, it'll be, the rules of that are obviously different. But it's kind of neat to think about. And obviously for the Shinigami, they want to prevent that from happening because this is the world that they've created, right? Shinigami don't have the same purpose in a world where everything is, like I say they don't have the same purpose. They could clearly still cleanse and kill hollows, but they don't have the same hierarchical power that they do. And I think that's the ultimate thing that's interesting here, is that if Shinigami were just a completely like pure organization, if it was just about protecting people and slaying hollows, then it wouldn't matter if the universe was one thing. The whole point of the split of the universes is a power grab from the Shinigami. It's to establish them as literally the arbiters of the afterlife, as these gods of death. And so for Shinigami, it's a threat that Quincy would send things back to how they used to be. Because and if you think about it, for Shinigami, the whole rite of reincarnation and everything like that ensures that they get to be the most powerful force. And so Quincy, that can eliminate a soul from the universe, that speaks towards them upsetting the power that Shinigami have just in general. So kind of neat, I like it. I like that they're kind of, Quincy are just naturally more powerful. At least have more capability to undo everything that the Shinigami kind of stand for, and that if the Shinigami are going to hold power and essentially be the ultimate institution of strength within the universe, then they need to eliminate the Quincy. Yeah, it's kind of neat. And it's neat to think about, whenever you think, oh, the Quincy are the bad guys, then it's like, well, no, because that was how the world used to be, right? It'd be like, this empire takes control and robs everybody of, like, basically like ancient medieval times, right? Like a king takes over this entire land, rules that nobody can have weapons, right? No one else can have weapons, only my knights. And it's like, well, yeah, because they don't want an uprising from all these other people that could have maybe a better rule not under this king that wants to have all the power. So yeah, kind of neat. So that's it for this chapter. Very cool chapter. Lots of connections to the other chapters, as always. If you see anything that you see as like a connection, or if you want to talk about any of this, again, please leave a comment. As always, give the video a like if I point out anything that you might not have seen, and I'd love it if you could subscribe to the channel if you're into this kind of stuff. If you've been watching these videos so far, give it a sub. You'll get notifications every time a new video goes up every day, and you won't miss out on anything. Anyway, that's it for this one, folks. As always, I've been Carker Gold, your host of this journey through Bleach. Thank you again so much for watching this video. I know, these tend to go nigh on an hour, so it's a good bit of your time, and I appreciate you spending that time here with me and my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this, but as always, never forget that spirits are forever with you. Stay gold.